I'm Wendy, and I've always been the black sheep in my family since the moment I was born. I brought disappointment to my father, who cherished hope for the boy throughout my mother's pregnancy. When the doctor, who solemnly announced the sex of the child, said girl, his face must have stretched out in disappointment, although I, being a baby, did not see it. But the feeling, this invisible, all-pervading knowledge has always remained with me. It became the background for all our relationships. In his eyes, I was still not the child who should have embodied his dreams and pride. From an early age, my older sister Sarah was the epitome of everything my parents could wish for. The golden child, as her family friends and relatives called her. Sarah shone in everything, smart, talented, always one step ahead. She couldn't do anything wrong, as if she had been endowed with angelic features since birth. Each of her achievements was perceived by her parents as the highest good, and the whole house was filled with praise for her success. Did you hear that? Sarah got the highest score on the math test again. The mother's voice sounded delighted. Look at this amazing picture that Sarah painted. My father added, pointing to the drawing, which soon proudly occupied a place on the wall of the living room. Meanwhile, I existed against the background of this radiance, like a shadow that no one noticed. My report cards caused neither joy nor sorrow, just indifference. The drawings that I brought with childish pride were quietly sent to the trash, without a single glance or comment. I'm used to being invisible. As I got older, I realized that the only way to deal with this is to learn to take care of myself. I started cooking my own dinners early, washing my own clothes, doing my homework without anyone's help. It didn't always work out perfectly, but gradually I became stronger and more independent. One of the highlights of my life was a discovery made on the day I was about 12 years old. I came home after school, hungry, and, as always, there was no one who could cook something for me to eat. At that moment, I decided to try baking cookies, a simple, warm treat that could satisfy my hunger and warm my soul. In search of a recipe, I found my mother's old cookbook, hidden somewhere on the far shelf. With interest mixed with a slight fear, I began to follow the instructions on the pages. That day, of course, I did not expect that the result would be so successful. The next morning, I took cookies to school. One of my classmates, Jenny, tasted a piece and, opening her eyes wide, exclaimed, "Wendy, this is just amazing." "Who made it, your mom?" I shook my head a little sheepishly, but proudly added, "No, I did it myself." These words, uttered for the first time with a sense of dignity, changed my perception of myself. For the first time, I felt special. My classmates started wondering if I could bring more cookies the next day. And it was a new feeling for me to be noticed, heard, recognized for my abilities. When I returned home that day, I was literally bursting with excitement. It was so unusual to feel that I had succeeded, that I had found my place. "Mom, Dad, guess what? I baked cookies, and everyone at school liked them." I exclaimed joyfully, expecting to hear praise for once. Mom, barely taking her eyes off the magazine, said indifferently, "That's great, honey. Just don't forget to clean the kitchen when you're done." The father frowned and added, "Cookies? Wendy, you'd better focus on your studies instead of wasting time baking." How did they behave while I was still in high school? My grades were decent, but unremarkable, and although they did not cause either delight or disappointment, every Saturday and Sunday I found my true appeal in the kitchen. Where the aroma of cinnamon, chocolate, and vanilla filled the house, I immersed myself in the creative process. Cake after cake, pie after pie, and then another cookie, these weekend rituals became a refuge for me, where I felt freedom and joy from creating something of my own. Over time, the neighbors began to be interested in my pastries, ordering cakes for birthdays or cookies for holidays. What started as a simple hobby soon turned into a small business. Mrs. Rodriguez, our neighbor from next door, once knocked on my door with a beaming smile. "Wendy, dear, I tried a piece of your chocolate cake at Lindsay's birthday party. It was divine. You have a real talent." Her words were like a warm ray of light in the cold shadow that always surrounded my relationship with my parents. I blushed with joy when I heard the compliment and replied, "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I'm thinking about going to culinary school after graduation." Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "This is a wonderful idea, Wendy. You have such abilities." But when I shared my dream with my parents, their reaction was far from enthusiastic. The mother's face contorted, as if she had heard something frivolous. "Culinary school? But it's just cooking." Her voice sounded like it was beneath my dignity. My father's reaction was even worse. He slammed his fist on the table, his face flushed with anger. "Absolutely not. No daughter of mine will waste her life in the kitchen." I tried to explain that it's not just a hobby. "But Dad, I'm good at it. People love my pastries." I protested, but in response I heard only cold laughter. "Do you really think you can make a living flipping burgers or decorating cakes? Wake up, Wendy. This doesn't happen in the real world." Mom intervened a little more gently, but her words didn't bring comfort either. "Darling, you have to think about your future. Look at Sarah, she's studying finance. She's going to have a real career." Those words hurt me more deeply than I could express. But despite the pain, I wasn't going to give up. Despite everything, I continued to sell my pastries at school fairs, doing so secretly. The response was overwhelming. My classmates were looking forward to my treats. "Wendy, these cookies are just a bomb," said my friend Jake, taking a bite with chocolate chips. "You should open your own bakery or something like that." I smiled, imagining a small cozy shop filled with the aromas of fresh pastries. It seemed like a dream that could be reached by hand. But it was different at home. One day, my father found a flyer with information about my bake sale. He entered the kitchen, clutching it in his fist. "What is it?" His voice was full of suspicion and discontent. I froze, feeling a lump in my throat. "It's for school. We're raising money for new computers," I lied. He squinted as if he could see through the lies. "Don't lie to me, Wendy. I know that you sell your cakes and cookies for money. It ends now. Can you hear me? You need to focus on your studies, not on this useless hobby." "But Dad, I earn good money." I tried to object. "Money?" he interrupted, his voice filled with mockery. "Do you call a few dollars for cookies real money? Do you know how much your sister earns on an internship? This is real money, Wendy. That's what I call the future." I bit my lip, trying to hold back the tears. "I was just thinking." I started, but he interrupted again. "No, you weren't thinking. Do you hear me? This baking nonsense is ending. You should raise your grades and apply to decent colleges. If I hear about any cake or cookies again, we will stop funding your education. No more support, okay?" That night I cried myself to sleep. The dream of cooking school crumbled in my mind like an overdried cookie. The next day, with a heavy heart, I started studying business colleges. My future seemed to be already sealed, but I swore that someday I would find a way to follow my dream. In the meantime, I had to play by their rules. The college flew by in a chaos of numbers, tables, and financial reports. I was completely immersed in the study of accounting, although every time I passed by a bakery or smelled the aroma of fresh bread, my heart ached. It seemed that this path was alien, but I continued to follow it for the sake of my parents' approval. When I finally got my degree, I got a job at a large corporation. My parents were delighted and proud of me, as if my life had finally got on the right rails. I rented a tiny apartment, determined to stand firmly on my feet. It was my first place of my own, small but cozy, where every corner reminded me of the beginning of a new chapter. But as I sat at my desk day after day, counting numbers and making reports, one evening I felt my spirits slowly fade away. Each new table plunged me into a world where there was no place for joy or inspiration, only a cold, mechanical routine. At some point, unable to take it anymore, I took out my old cookbook. Its pages were covered with stains of butter and flour, which absorbed particles of those times when I felt really happy. Deciding to bring back a little of that feeling, I hastily kneaded the cupcake dough. I got lost in the familiar rhythms of mixing ingredients, watched the dough slowly rise in the oven, and felt the warmth begin to rise in my heart again. The next day, I brought cupcakes to work. The response was instant and overwhelming. "Oh my God, Wendy, this is amazing," my colleague Lisa exclaimed, taking a bite. "Where did you buy them?" I hesitated a little, but then I confessed, I baked them myself. After that, word of my culinary skills spread quickly. Soon, my colleagues started asking if I could bake cakes for their birthdays, children's parties, and then even weddings. I started small, just a few orders on weekends. However, soon every free minute, not occupied by accounting, was spent on baking. My tiny apartment was constantly filled with the aromas of vanilla, chocolate, and cinnamon. The mountains of dishes grew as fast as my orders. But I felt like I had found myself. The turning point came when our company celebrated its anniversary. The head director, a man whom I had only seen from afar until that day, came up to me during my lunch break. "Wendy, I hear you're a real baker," he said with a grin, as if he had discovered something long lost. "How would you feel about baking a cake for our anniversary party?" My heart started pounding faster. It was a huge opportunity and a huge risk. But I couldn't refuse. On the anniversary day, I rolled in a huge cake decorated with the company logo and intricate sugar flowers. When I took the lid off this masterpiece, silence reigned in the hall. All eyes were on my creation. The director smiled broadly. "This is incredible." He turned to the crowd and loudly added, "Everyone, let's applaud Wendy, our accounting wizard and, obviously, the pastry chef." The room exploded with applause, and at that moment I realized that I was standing on the threshold of something much bigger. The director came closer to me, his voice became softer, almost intimate. "You're wasting your talent in accounting, Wendy. This is your real calling." These words stuck in my mind for the next few months. As the orders continued to arrive, I realized that it was time to make a choice. I worked 2 jobs, as an accountant during the day and as a baker at night. Something had to change. One night, surrounded by floral powder and endless orders, I realized that I couldn't do it anymore. It was a moment of truth. The next day, feeling lighter than I had felt for many years, I submitted my resignation. My supervisor was stunned. "But why? You are one of our best employees." I smiled at him, and for the first time in a long time I felt the weight of all these years being lifted from my shoulders. "I have found my true passion," I replied simply. I rented a small commercial kitchen and plunged headlong into a new business. It was both scary and exciting at the same time. There were nights when I didn't sleep until dawn, fulfilling orders. In those moments, I often wondered if I had made a huge mistake. But gradually my bakery started to grow. I hired the first employee, then the second. We moved into a larger room, and soon my cakes and pastries became known all over the city. All this time, I kept my success a secret from my parents. In their eyes, I was still a successful accountant climbing the corporate ladder. I told myself that I was waiting for the right moment to tell them the truth. But actually I was afraid to disappoint them, afraid of their anger, their rejection. As my bakery business grew, I knew I needed to take it to a new level. I plunged into the world of modern marketing, trying to highlight my small shop in a crowded market. I created social media pages where I posted mouth-watering photos of my cakes and cookies every day. My subscribers grew every day, but I carefully avoided getting into the frame. No selfies, no face of the business, just cakes, cookies and pastries in all their sweet and fragrant glory. Despite my paranoia, the business was booming. We started cooperating with the local courier service, which allowed us to expand our activities throughout the city. This step was crucial. Suddenly our desserts became available to every corner of the city. I have implemented a loyalty program, offering discounts and bonuses to regular customers, which has made our brand even more attractive. But the real masterstroke was my idea to open the bakery doors for tastings once a month on Saturdays. Free baking samples attracted hundreds of people as soon as word spread about it. I remember how nervous I was on the first day of the tasting. What if no one comes? What if my pastries don't turn out to be as attractive as I thought? My loyal assistant Jess, who has worked with me since the early days, rolled her eyes at my worries. Boss, have you even tried your own creations? People will be queuing around the block. And she was right. By noon, when the sun was at its zenith, the crowd on the street stretched for an entire block. Inside the bakery there was the aroma of fresh bread and vanilla, and people's faces shone with happiness with each new piece of baking. The popularity of our bakery soon reached the skies. We started serving high-profile events, delivering desserts to high-end restaurants, and even shipping our signature cookies all over the country. With success came money, such sums that I could not even imagine that one day I would be able to earn by just baking cookies, as my father would say. Before I knew it, my income exceeded the salary of Sarah, who was building her brilliant banking career. I started helping my parents, always using my successful accounting career as a cover. When they needed to replace the roof, I paid the bill without delay. When Mom once casually mentioned that she dreamed of seeing Europe, I surprised them with tickets for the trip. "Oh, Wendy, you shouldn't spend that kind of money on us," Mom said stiffly, but her eyes were shining with excitement. Despite my financial support, my parents remained devoted fans of Sarah. She was still living at home, surrounded by designer clothes and new gadgets, spending her salary on all sorts of pleasures. In their eyes, Sarah remained a star. "Have you heard about Sarah's promotion?" Mom was beaming. She's now the vice president of her department, at just 28 years old. I just smiled modestly and congratulated her, although inside I felt a strange mixture of pride for my sister and bitterness that my own achievements didn't seem to matter. This day, which should have been ordinary, began, as always, in my bakery, Sweet Dreams. I was standing in the kitchen finishing an elaborate wedding cake when Jess burst into the room waving an order form. Her eyes were burning with surprise. "Boss, you won't believe it," her voice was trembling with excitement. I wiped my hands on my apron and frowned. Jess handed me the form with the address and dramatically stopped. "We have just received an order for the delivery of a birthday cake. And do you know where to go? Your parents' house." At that moment, I felt an icy cold spreading all over my body. I asked, trying to hide my excitement. She nodded, handing me a piece of paper. The address of my childhood was indicated in black and white, and the name of the customer was my mother. For a moment, I just stood there, unable to breathe. All sorts of thoughts began to flash through my head. But soon, out of the chaos of doubts, a clear plan was born. "Jess," I said, and my voice was firm despite the inner storm. "Clear my schedule. This cake will be my masterpiece." Over the next week, I put my whole soul into this cake. I knew it wasn't just another order. It was my opportunity to prove, first of all to myself, that I can regain the recognition and pride of my parents. 3 layers are my mother's favorite flavors, each decorated with delicate sugar flowers and the finest sculptures made of icing sugar. I thought through every touch, adding details that I knew Mom would appreciate. On the day of the party, I arrived in advance, holding a small gift in my hands, which served as a cover for my unexpected delivery. The house was full of relatives, many of whom I hadn't seen for many years. "Wendy," exclaimed Aunt Clara, coming over and hugging me. "Look at you. You're still beautiful. Are you still gnawing on the numbers?" I nodded, holding back a smile. The familiar lie stuck in my throat like a bone, but before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Mom immediately went to open it, and a minute later a courier appeared in the doorway with our branded box from Sweet Dreams. "Special delivery for the birthday girl," he announced cheerfully. There was an awkward silence in the room as Mom carried the box to the dining room table. I stood aside, my heart beating so loudly that it seemed everyone could hear it. Mom carefully lifted the lid of the box, and for a moment everyone held their breath. The eyes of others were riveted on my cake, a masterpiece that I created with special care. Sounds of admiration and approval rang out from all corners of the room. People whispered to each other, noting every stroke of my skill, every neatly sculpted sugar flower. I was waiting for the moment to speak, to tell how this cake came to be here, but before I could open my mouth, Dad cleared his throat. His face became serious, and there was an unexpected severity in his voice. Before we celebrate, we need to discuss something. The silence in the room was deafening. All eyes turned to my parents, their faces taking on the same frowning expressions. I froze in place, feeling an icy chill envelop me from the inside. The next moment, Dad's voice, full of contempt, cut through the air like a knife. "Can you believe it?" he said, addressing the assembled relatives, his finger pointed reproachfully at me. "Our Wendy has been lying to us all these years. She's not an accountant. She's a pastry chef." He spat out the word as if it were poisonous. A wave of whispers swept through the room. I opened my mouth, trying to say something in my defense, but the words stuck in my throat, as if all my strength had disappeared at that moment. This couldn't be happening in reality, I thought, but my father continued, his face filled with anger. "We always dreamed that our daughters would become successful, respected people. Real members of society." He gestured towards Sarah, who was sitting with her back turned. "Look at your sister. A vice president at such a young age. That's something to be proud of." Sarah moved restlessly in her seat, not daring to look me in the eye. Then Mom, her gaze heavy and cold, said the words that fell on me like a knife. "We gave you everything, Wendy, all the opportunities, and this is how you repay us, by becoming an ordinary cook." The word ordinary pierced me like an arrow. How could they devalue what I built so much? They didn't understand. They didn't see how much I had invested in this case. And then Dad, in an instant, as if in some kind of madness, grabbed the cake box and turned it over on the floor. I froze in horror, not believing my eyes. My creation, the cake that I put so much love and effort into, collapsed to the floor, crumbling into a chaotic mess of icing and sponge cake. A collective sigh rang out among the guests, and then Dad laughed harshly. "We're not going to eat it," he sneered, with undisguised contempt. "It's beneath our dignity." Mom nodded in agreement. "Wendy, you have shown that you are not worthy to be among us. You disobeyed us, and we can no longer support you." And then Dad said the words that hit me more than any physical blow. "We renounce you. You're not our daughter anymore." The world around me collapsed. I didn't hear anything else, not their words, not the whispers of the guests. I stood as if paralyzed, tears streaming down my cheeks, but I couldn't move. How could they do that? How could they reject everything I've achieved? I looked for at least one ally among the audience, but everyone avoided my gaze. Aunt Clara, who had hugged me a minute ago, was now whispering something to Uncle Joe, and I caught her words. "I always knew there would be problems with this girl." The others nodded as if agreeing with her. The room, which had recently been filled with warmth and joy, suddenly became cold and hostile. "Go away," Mom said in an icy voice. "Leave now and don't contact us anymore." I stood there, feeling the ground give way under my feet. I couldn't believe what was happening. How could Native people act so cruelly? "Didn't you hear what your mother said?" Dad roared. With some superhuman effort, I found the strength to move. I turned and walked to the door, my vision blurred with tears. I touched the door handle, and at that moment, through the silence, I heard Sarah's thin voice. "Mom, Dad, maybe we should." But her words were cut off when the door closed behind me. I went down the steps that used to seem so familiar to me, but now they are cold and alien. I got to my car before the sobs I was holding back burst out. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I sat behind the wheel, surrounded by the remnants of the family I had just lost. It felt like something had broken inside of me. The dream that I had cherished for so long, the dream of getting my parents' approval so that they would finally see and recognize me, crumbled like a cake that was lying on the dining room floor. I do not know how long I sat there, lost in my own thoughts, until my tears dried up and a dull pain replaced the sobs. The sun was already setting, its golden rays casting long shadows on the quiet streets of the neighborhood where I grew up. At that moment, I knew one thing for sure: would never be able to return here again. The days after that disastrous birthday party blurred into one continuous canvas. Everything seemed insignificant, as if I existed in a thick fog that enveloped every minute. I moved like a ghost, barely ate and barely slept. The bakery continued to function thanks to my incredible staff, who held everything on their shoulders while I tried to figure out what had happened. When the shock gradually began to recede, I plunged into work with renewed vigor. If my family could not understand and appreciate my passion, then I will show the whole world how exceptional an ordinary pastry chef can be. My business was thriving. We opened a second bakery, then a third. Magazine articles, TV reports, cookbook contracts, success came in waves, and I rode each of them with determination. I bought myself a cozy apartment in the city center, turning it into my personal shelter, where I could finally feel safe. 2 years after that party, I met Jack. He was kind and attentive, always admired my cakes, claiming that they were the best thing that could be thought of after sliced bread. When Jack proposed to me, I didn't hesitate. We got married a year later. The wedding was small, but it was perfect for us. I looked at the smiling faces of our friends and the family that I had chosen myself, my employees, my friends, my husband. And at that moment, I realized that I didn't miss my blood relatives. These people around me have become my real family. Life gradually entered a calm and steady rhythm. The bakery continued to thrive, and Jack and I built a happy life together. I've had everything I've ever dreamed of, except for one thing: closing this chapter completely with my parents. That changed on Tuesday afternoon, 5 years after that fateful birthday party. I was sitting in my office, reviewing plans for a new bakery branch, when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside me prompted me to answer. "Hi, Wendy." The voice on the other end was uncertain, but I recognized it immediately. It was Mom. "Please don't hang up, we need to talk," she spoke quickly, and from her words I could make out that some kind of trouble had happened. The bank where Sarah worked lost its license. As a result, there were mass layoffs, and Sarah was left without a job. She had been trying unsuccessfully for months to find a new place, and now they needed help. Before I could comprehend what I had heard, I heard my father's voice. He was as sharp as he was 5 years ago. "You have to give Sarah a job in your bakery. She has real business management experience, and she should run your business, and you can just be one of the bakers." The absurdity of it all struck me. 5 years of silence, 5 years of complete disregard, and now they decided to reach out just because they needed something from me. A cold laugh escaped me, and I answered, "Let me understand. You disowned me, kicked me out, and now you demand that I hand over my business to Sarah? We gave you life," my father shouted. "We raised you, and you owe us." Something clicked in me at that moment. All the pain, all the anger that I had been suppressing for years, came flooding back at once. "I don't owe you anything," I replied, my voice hard and cold. "You made your choice 5 years ago. I'm not your daughter, remember? I am the same ordinary cook who is below you, and I am definitely not going to help either you or Sarah. Goodbye." I hung up the phone, trembling slightly. For a moment, I just sat there, digesting what had just happened. And then slowly, almost unconsciously, a smile began to spread across my face. I felt lighter, as if a huge weight that I hadn't even suspected had been lifted from my shoulders. I was free. My family saga continued. Life threw up new challenges for me. One quiet Sunday morning, my phone rang, and a number I hadn't seen in years popped up on the screen: Sarah's number. My heart stopped, and mixed feelings surged through me, curiosity and apprehension. But something inside me made me answer. "Hi," her voice was soft and hesitant, as if she didn't know where to start. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's okay, Sarah, what's wrong?" A conversation ensued that I couldn't have predicted and that turned a lot of things around in my perception. Sarah apologized for the behavior of our parents, both then, 5 years ago, and recently, when they tried to use me for their own purposes again. Her voice was trembling, full of emotion, I didn't even know that they called you and asked you to give me a job. I would never allow myself to do that. I'm so sorry, Wendy. I felt the knot of tension inside me that I had been carrying all these years begin to unravel a little. Thank you, Sarah, I said with unexpected warmth. Those words meant more to me than I could express. Sarah continued to speak. Her voice became firmer, although emotions were still felt in every word. Losing her job was a real test for her, but also a wake-up call. I realized that I had not been living my life all this time. Banking, finance, that was what Mom and Dad wanted for me, not me. My whole life so far has been their dream, not mine. I listened in disbelief. Sarah, the golden child, whom I always thought of as an exemplary daughter living an ideal life, suddenly turned out to be as lost as I once was. She admitted that my story inspired her. Seeing how you build your business, follow your passion, was a revelation to me. It showed me that you can change your life. I signed up for an interior design course. I want to create beautiful spaces. I want to be true to myself, like you, Wendy. Tears came to my eyes. I never imagined that my sister could have similar feelings, that she too struggled with expectations and pressure from her parents. That's great, Sarah. I'm so happy for you, I managed to say through the surging emotions. There was a pause in the air, and then Sarah's voice sounded again with a new depth of emotion. I'm proud of you, Wendy. You stood up for yourself, followed your dreams, no matter what. You're living the life you chose, and it's amazing. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Everything, the pain, resentment, anger that I had been saving up for years, burst out. We talked for a long time, shared our hopes and fears for hours, and made up for lost time. At the end of the conversation, Sarah, a little hesitantly, suggested, maybe we'll meet sometime? We'll just talk and share the news. We could support each other. I found myself nodding, even though she couldn't see it. I'd like that, Sarah. Very much. In the following months, Sarah and I started seeing each other regularly. We drank coffee in my bakery, laughed at old family stories, and supported each other in our new endeavors. Sarah's interior design business began to gain momentum, and I was proud to watch her build her career, finally following her dream. We only found out about our parents through rumors. When Sarah left banking, they, like with me, turned their backs on her. They told everyone that their daughters had disappointed them. One was a simple cook, the other a frivolous decorator. But Sarah and I knew the truth. We lived our dreams, built a successful career, doing what we loved. One day, sitting at a table in my noisy bakery, Sarah looked at me with a soft smile. You know, I think we did pretty well, no matter what. I laughed, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the hot ovens of a bakery. Yes, I agreed. I think we did it. Sarah drew a new design idea on a napkin, surrounded by the aroma of freshly baked bread and the joyful hubbub of customers. I looked at her, feeling deeply satisfied. It was my life. Messy, complicated, but ultimately sweet. I fought for my dreams, lost some battles, but eventually won my war.